Hello there. My name is Yowei Shaw, and the reason I'm starting this podcast is because recently I got laid off from hosting another podcast.
From NPR, this is Invisibilia. I'm Yowei Shaw. So earlier this season, we did a story about how...
Last February, NPR informed me and my colleagues that layoffs were coming in a month. The threat of recession had triggered an advertising downturn, and NPR had a budget shortfall. NPR said they needed to lay 10% of us off. And so, after a month of sleepless nights and teeth grinding...
Okay. And I am logging into my work computer.
One day last March, I was sitting in my home office with my cat by my feet. I braced myself as I clicked open my work email.
Ah, there it is. Honestly, I feel nothing. Okay, now the tears are coming. I'm really gonna miss working with my team. And obviously, it sucks being discarded like this.
I was laid off, and they were canceling Invisibilia. Along with the email I got, there was a Zoom invite to meet with my department head and an HR rep.
Okay, I'm gonna go smoke a cigarette before this meeting with... And then I gotta get ready really quick, because I am not gonna look like a crying mess in front of... I am not. I guarantee you. I'm gonna really, really, really try not to cry. Really, really, really.
Oh, how gloriously I failed. I cried so much in my meeting that my Hello Kitty Kleenex fell apart in my hands. And I just remember looking through my blurred, teary vision and seeing the HR lady on the screen, smiling blankly. I've been with Invisibilia for 7 years, worked my way up from producer who did admin, to reporter-producer, to senior reporter-producer, to co-host. I felt really lucky to get paid to do the thing I loved, making stories about ideas and emotions, stories that I hope helped our listeners understand how to navigate the world. I love my team. I love my job. So I knew that getting laid off was going to hurt. But I was not prepared for how much it hurt and how long the hurt lasted. I was not prepared for how the layoff turned me into someone I didn't recognize. I mean, objectively, I knew I had it about as good as it gets. I got severance, I had savings, I didn't have kids, I had a partner, I had parents I could rely on if things got really bad. And I knew the layoff wasn't about me. NPR had made a strategic shift, and shows like mine weren't part of the new strategy. They specifically told me it was a business decision and had nothing to do with my performance. So why did I keep cycling through old mistakes, wondering what I could have done differently? Why did it feel like NPR was rejecting everything about me? Why did I want to hide from everyone? Why was my self-worth on the floor? And here was the difficult part. No one in my life had been laid off before. So while my friends and family tried to be supportive, they all had trouble understanding exactly what I was going through, which made it hard for them to give me the advice and comfort I needed. I just felt really alone. And that's where my new show comes in. Welcome to the first episode of Proxy. I'm Yowei Shaw. Thank you so much for being here. So what is Proxy? What are we doing here? Well, it all stems from this move I've made in the past, where sometimes, in order to deal with my feelings, I would report on them. I'd find the people that I could ask my questions. These were experts and strangers with shared experience. And I started to call these people proxies, because after talking to them about how they navigated my same issue, I'd understand my own feelings by proxy, as the saying goes. That's what the show is about. I want to give other people this experience. And look, this is not an advice show. It's definitely not therapy. We're going to do something different here. We're going to look at your niche, emotional questions, the conundrums that make you feel alone, and we're going to connect you with the proxies you need. for a direct, honest conversation. Maybe you're an introvert who wants to stop feeling resentful of the extroverts in your life. Maybe you've survived prostate cancer and have questions around sex. We're going to cover heavy stories, as well as absurd, silly ones too. But we're kicking things off with a special 3-part series about a conundrum that is very, very, very personal. It's kind of the prologue to the show. More than a few people told me not to make this series. You don't want to be layoff girl, someone said, like you're not over it. But I'm not the only layoff girl. There are millions of layoff girls, layoff boys, layoff thems every year, all over the country. By one estimate, 40% of American workers get laid off at least once in their careers. So this series is for all of us on Team Layoff. And honestly, it's for everyone else too. Because you might know someone who's going to get laid off tomorrow. It might be you. Real quick, before we get started, I just want to talk to the NPR lawyers and execs listening right now. And I know you're listening. You can relax. This is not a story where I gripe about NPR. I still love you, NPR. Everyone go support your local public radio station. These people are doing very important work. Okay, welcome to episode 1 of the Layoff Trilogy. Layoff Girl. If there was a movie about my layoff, what would be the B-roll and scenes that would establish how bad I felt afterwards?
Yeah, there'd be music playing and it would show you like out with friends or at a function and you would have like a forced smile and then, you know, maybe someone would ask you a question and then you would like answer and then burst into tears.
Yeah, the question would be like, how are you?
Yeah. You'd be like,
The person so rudely impersonating my tears is my husband, Kyle. He's had a lot of material to work with.
I think my mom gave you some very generic mom advice, just like, one door closes and another opens, and you're like, no, doors don't work like that.
Yeah, no, I know. Poor mom. Poor everybody in my life during that time.
Yeah.
I was a terror.
You were very fragile. Your entire body was like a scuffed knee from skateboarding.
Yeah. I can laugh about this now. But in the weeks after the layoff, I couldn't even talk about it. My friends and family were reaching out to support me, but every interaction felt like an accusation or put down. At a family birthday party, I remember hiding in the bathroom. I felt like everyone was looking at me differently, like I was a video game character whose points had dropped way, way down. When I wasn't dodging friends and family, I was in bed, binging Drag Race, with a bottle of rosé and a plate of fried food on the nightstand.
I don't think it's a coincidence that I really leaned into learning how to make air fryer fried chicken around that time. You know, we're trying to be frugal. Yeah. But you also needed treats.
And then one day last May, I was like, get up. You are going on a walk, Yowei. It was a perfect spring day in the Wissahickon woods. Birds chirping, green buds popping up everywhere. I was meeting a friend, a colleague I hadn't seen in a while, and it was a relief to be with someone in my industry who understood everything that was happening. We caught up. I told my friend about the hellish month of waiting for the layoffs, how even though I was a shop steward for my union who really believed in solidarity, my brain started doing this dark math. I'd be in a meeting and I'd start ranking my worth against my colleagues. Who had more downloads? Who had more experience? Who was more expensive? I'd look at the little Zoom boxes and wonder which one of us would get the chop. I also told my friend that during that last month, I never felt closer to my colleagues. I was moved by how everyone showed up for each other, shared job postings, strategized about all staffs. Plus, everyone got like 10 times funnier. It was a gallows kind of humor, but still. One of my favorite jokes flying around was to cry or not to cry in your layoff meeting. Do you try to traumatize the person handing you the pink slip, or do you try not to let them see you sweat? But mainly, I told my friend about how bad I felt and how bad I felt about feeling so bad. I told them about all the questions swirling in my head. I could probably find another job in podcasting with my 15 years of experience. So why did I feel so inadequate? Why did I keep blaming myself when I knew the layoff wasn't about my performance? Or at least that's what they told me. At this point in the walk, I felt self-conscious, talking so much about myself. But my friend wasn't annoyed. They were intrigued. I should mention that this friend happens to work at a big, famous podcast and radio show that I'm not going to name, but you've definitely heard of. My friend was like, Yowei, I think there's a story here. What do you think about pitching it? I was like, yeah, why not pitch it? Why not make the move I've made in the past, where I process my feelings by reporting on them? And maybe the story could help other people work through their layoff stuff too. When I got home, I whipped out my laptop. I started working on my pitch. And for the first time since getting laid off, I felt a spark of the old Yowei. The next week, my friend and I met again. And it felt like I was on drugs. It just felt so good to talk story, to talk research, to talk ideas. My friend submitted the pitch to the weekly meeting, and then I tried not to think about it. This show is notoriously hard to get anything through. I wasn't going to get my hopes up and then dashed. I was too fragile for that. Later that day, I got a text. The story was greenlit. After the break, Layoff Girl gets back to work.
Hi there, it's Zakiya, the host of Hang Up, a reality dating show with no rings attached. Think of Hang Up like a cross between The Bachelor and Love is Blind, but queer, with a focus on dating and connection rather than marriage. On Hang Up, you don't just get to eavesdrop on dates. There's also a series of eliminations. And in the end, there's a twist. The new season is out now, so stay on the line.
Now, after a story gets greenlit, the first thing you do is you start researching. Digging around online, reading books. This is one of my favorite moments as a reporter. You go from blobs of feelings and anecdotes to research that connects the blobs and starts to bring them into focus. And for me, the thing I was trying to understand was the intensity of my feelings. Why did it feel like I hadn't just lost a job, but I'd lost my mind? And now I'm going to share some of the things I found in my early research. Time to cue some corporate motivational video music to get us through. Okay, the first thing I learned is that layoffs used to be a stain on the company's reputation. Before the 1970s, companies used to avoid mass layoffs. For blue-collar jobs, a company would only do layoffs if they absolutely had to, like during bad economic times. But even then, when the economy rebounded, there'd be a recall to bring workers back. As for white-collar jobs, there were hardly any layoffs. Pre-1970s was the time when a white-collar worker could reasonably expect to stay with the same company for life. This was the time when many companies felt an obligation to employees in the communities they operated in. Imagine that. And then there's this shift. Starting in the 1970s, globalization happens, deregulation happens, unions get weaker, companies start moving jobs to wherever the labor is cheapest, the old job security collapses. And there's this new business theory in the air. Here's a quote from Milton Friedman, one of the leading economists of the day. I made Kyle read it in an old man voice.
There is only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits.
So that's when companies become all about profits, profits, profits for shareholders. And then I read about this guy, Jack Welch, who comes on the scene in the 80s.
Hi, I was the CEO of General Electric.
Jack Welch reframed layoffs as a business innovation. Heavy quotes there. Layoffs were nothing to be ashamed of, he said.
That's right.
In fact, they were something to tout to shareholders, a sign that the company was becoming more efficient, doing what's necessary to maximize profits.
I popularized the idea that mass layoffs were a good thing, even when a company's doing fine.
One of the most influential business books from the time was actually called Mean Business, which, not so creative a title, but to the point.
I think that book title has synergy.
Fuck off, Jack. So, in my initial reading, I learned about this shift in how businesses shed the public shame of layoffs. But that didn't explain the deep shame that workers feel, that I felt after being laid off.
Hello?
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Next up was to call experts: sociologists, economists, psychologists, business school professors, people who've studied layoffs and the effect they have on our well-being. And they told me lots of interesting things. I learned that other countries like Germany and Brazil have legal requirements around things like advance notice or severance. But here in the US, there is very little regulation and enforcement around how layoffs need to go down. So even though I felt really bad, I was told by experts that my layoff was about as good as it gets.
Severances are really, these days, an indicator of being in an elite position.
In addition to severance, I got a few months of health care. I got advance notice, so I had time to prepare. Most people getting laid off don't get those things.
Yeah, the norm is quite bad.
The norm is quite bad. Okay.
I also learned to my dismay that laid-off workers suffer an estimated 20% decline in earnings over a lifetime. Yikes. Layoffs are also linked to an increased risk of divorce, depression, even mortality, an increased risk for hospitalization, cardiovascular disease, and suicide. Even if you're healthy, the odds of developing a new health condition rises by 83% in the first 15 to 18 months after a layoff. Well, that would have been nice to know before all the fried chicken.
We always used to talk about letting people go as being the equivalent of capital punishment in the workplace.
Talking to all these experts made it clear that layoffs were a traumatic experience, especially for people who aren't able to find another job for a while, or whose layoff makes it hard for them to survive, afford rent, buy food. All this made sense to me. But I was still searching for an answer to why getting laid off can feel so devastating for people like me, who are materially okay. And then I found this guy.
We have a stigma of unemployment in our society, and that it's everywhere.
Ofer Sharone is a sociologist and associate professor at UMass Amherst, who's written 2 books on the subject: Flawed System, Flawed Self, and The Stigma Trap. Talking to Ofer helped me understand why I kept blaming myself, even though it wasn't rational, and why I felt like people were looking at me differently. Turns out, they probably were looking at me differently because of stigma.
The unemployment stigma is a complete, I think, blind spot in our society and public discourse.
In 2013, Ofer did this study comparing laid-off workers in San Francisco and laid-off workers in Israel. He interviewed a lot of people in both places and spent time sitting in on support groups and workshops for unemployed people. And he found a consistent pattern. The Israelis didn't blame themselves for their layoff.
There was a lot of anger and a lot of upsetness with how could this be happening? But there was no tinge of shame.
While the laid-off Americans pointed the finger at themselves.
Maybe something is really wrong with me. Maybe I'm flawed.
Ofer knows that Israel and the U.S. have different cultural and economic roots. Socialism in Israel, capitalism in the U.S. But he wanted to look past ideology and see if there were other reasons why Americans felt shame and the Israelis didn't. And in his interviews, Ofer found one major difference. The hiring process was really different in the 2 countries. In his 2013 study, Ofer's Israeli participants said that hiring had more to do with past experience and test results, not your cover letter or some story you tell at the interview. It's much more, do you check the boxes or not?
It's a system that doesn't really see you. It's not personal. They never even looked at you.
Whereas in the U.S., checking the boxes of qualifications is just one step to getting to the interview. And that's where you get a chance to sell who you are beyond the resume and skills. Show that you're the right person for the team and culture.
A sense of rapport, often they would refer to it as chemistry.
So in America, getting hired is much more personal and can feel like a validation of you. Now, this doesn't sound all bad. Seems like a good thing to try to get to know the people you're hiring to see if they're a fit for your team. In fact, the Israeli participants told Ofer they wished they were more seen in the hiring process. But the takeaway here is when the hiring process is a validation of you, it means that when you get laid off, it can feel like a rejection of you.
You're looked at deeply, and they rejected you. That is a more personalized and painful form of rejection.
When I heard this, something clicked inside me. After months of deep, at times debilitating self-doubt, this felt like a real insight. Because that deep sense of rejection that I felt, it wasn't just me being stupid. It was built into the system. And it's not just the people who are laid off who buy into this stigma. Research shows that hiring managers discriminate against unemployed people, especially if you're over 50 and if you've been unemployed longer than 6 months.
Recruiters would say to me, if someone's laid off, it raises a question mark.
So let's say 2 people apply to a job, all their qualifications are equal, but one of them was laid off recently. Studies show that the unemployed person is statistically less likely to get an interview. Ofer wanted to know the story behind this data. So for his book, The Stigma Trap, he interviewed a bunch of recruiters, and they said things that made my jaw drop.
The way they would explain it is, I've got a big pile of applicants. I need to whittle it down. I'm looking for useful shortcuts. And unemployment was seen as an acceptable shortcut.
The stigma is so strong against laid off people that people don't mind telling on themselves.
Yes, because at some level they believe it. At some level they believe it. And there has not been a cultural campaign, a civil rights movement, a lot of attention to this bias, right? This bias is just allowed to continue without really being challenged.
But wait, there's more. Ofer says there's another group of people who can contribute to the stigma. Our friends, our family, our colleagues, who start to wonder,
what's wrong with you? Is there something wrong with you?
Did you do something to get laid off? Why don't you do more of the housework now? How hard are you even looking? Or just silence?
Of course, this leads to negative emotions.
So imagine you get laid off. First, you see yourself as damaged goods. And then hiring managers see you as damaged goods. You can't get an interview. Then the people close to you, even if it's just a few of them, start to look at you differently. This can all make you feel even worse, which makes it even harder to get a job and back on your feet. Because, as recruiters told Ofer, even a hint of negative feelings about a former employer or about being laid off will get you disqualified. And just like that, you're stuck in what Ofer Sharone calls the stigma trap, a vicious cycle where you've got negative feedback loops in every direction.
This is a trap because the further you get into the experience, the harder it is to get out. The more you're stigmatized, the longer you're unemployed. The longer you're unemployed, the more likely you will have negative experiences, negative feelings.
Okay, so there I was, gathering lots of juicy and upsetting research for my story. I could point to these larger forces and patterns. But for the story to work, I needed to find a specific narrative with characters to bring these ideas to life.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello?
So I started talking to people. And pretty soon, I was drowning in layoff stories.
I was having like a great day, actually.
How long am I going to stay?
There was the woman who got laid off from her paper, only to face more layoffs at her new paper.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do?
There was the man who couldn't stop checking a layoff rumor website, even though it gave him anxiety.
It's terrible for actual information. It's just like anonymous people posting on there saying, oh, I think there's layoffs, or I'm worried about layoffs.
And I spoke to a woman waiting to see if she was getting laid off. She was several months pregnant and used to feel joy when her baby kicked, but now just felt dread.
I'm literally feeling him move right now, and I don't feel as connected.
These stories were gut-wrenching, and they all said something important about layoffs. But then I met Miles and Elliot.
You can be honest, babe. I know I have not been pleasant to be around. I'm sorry. My poor baby.
When I spoke to the couple, they explained that they were dealing with several layoff traumas at once. Elliot had just gotten laid off. It was a total surprise.
I just screamed like I have never screamed before.
And here was the first twist. Elliot and Miles worked at the same company. So after his husband was let go, Miles had to keep going to work. He was feeling survivor's guilt. Why Elliot? Why not me? Plus, he still had to interact with the people who laid off his husband.
She said, "Oh, Miles, good to see you." And I don't know. I really wanted to be like, "You think I fucking believe that shit?"
And there was a second twist. Only a few weeks after Elliot was let go, Miles heard that more layoffs were coming. He even knew the day they'd happen.
So I now have a meeting with my boss on the danger day.
I was like, no way. No way. What?
Their story was rich in details, plot twists. I could identify with the emotions in their story. Plus, they gave really good tape.
By the way, it's transphobic to lay someone off during Pride Month. Just gonna put that out there.
Yes, in the eyes of the company, I am deceased. I am dead. I'm gone. And I'm just a ghost. But I'm very much alive. It was a total, a mind fuck.
If there's one thing podcast listeners love, it's a story with a mind fuck. This was it. This was the story. I somehow pulled it off again. But it turns out there was one more mind fuck coming my way. That's after the break. All right, popping in real quick, it's Yowei. At some point, we'll have ads here, fingers crossed. For now, I'm going to take this moment to tell you that I have a Patreon where you can get bonus episodes, the newsletter, and other goodies. Go to patreon.com/proxypodcast. Again, that's patreon.com/proxypodcast. Okay, back to the show. In August of last year, I flew out to interview Elliot and Miles at their home.
This looks like an immaculate household. I will absolutely take off my shoes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
I ate homemade arepas with them.
Thanks, babe.
Met their 3 very cute cats.
Come on, Dickens.
Inspected the tomatoes that had fallen in their backyard.
No, my tomatoes.
I experienced the deadly wink of Miles.
That is an amazing wink.
The interviews were great.
I love you.
There were moments of real suspense in their story.
The colleague that she was going to have to lay off, he walked right past the room.
No.
Yeah.
I flew home, logged all the tape, and started pulling the selects. I wrote a first draft, sat through an edit with my producer and editor, tinkering with structure, cutting, clarifying. I wrote a second draft, sat through another edit with my producer and editor. Other producers at the show weighed in, gave notes. The story got slated as the anchor for an episode, which was a big deal. We started brainstorming episode titles. Everything was locking into place. I was back in my element. I wrote Instagram posts about the story. I stopped dreading the question, "What are you working on?" Now I volunteered the information. I told everyone I could. And everyone was like, now that's a comeback story. I even started to have this fantasy that the people at NPR who laid me off would listen to the episode and they'd shake their head and say, "We really made a mistake letting Yowei go." And then one day last fall, I got a call from my producer. I could tell her tone was off. She said she wanted to give me a heads up. She told me the story was on the bubble. The show was having second thoughts. I recorded my reaction. 2 weeks later, my editor let me know the final verdict. They were so sorry, but they were killing the story. And look, I've killed stories myself. It happens. It's part of the biz. And to be fair, the show really tried. We worked on another version, did extra edits. The story just wasn't what they were looking for. They even gave me a generous kill fee, which not all places do, by the way. I knew all this intellectually, but emotionally,
I just heard this incredible, just pitiful wailing.
I didn't record said wailing, but lucky for you, my husband remembers it well.
I heard it from the shower.
Oh my God.
And I was just like, what is going on? So I jumped out of the shower and just like burst into the room naked. And it just sounded like somebody had died or just, I don't know. It just sounded like something truly like tragic had happened.
Nope. Nobody had died. Just a dead story.
Had you ever heard me cry like that before?
No.
Okay, so it's a little pathetic that given all the things that have happened in our lives, that's the hardest I've ever cried.
I know, but I think that story was the scaffolding that was, propping you up. I think it was offering you a lot of purpose, a lot of comfort, a story you could tell yourself that would soothe this thing that was very painful. And I think you're just in a very vulnerable place to get rejected like that. I don't think it had anything to do with like in the grand scheme of things, it's just one story. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that big of a deal. I would liken it to when our cat died a couple weeks after my grandfather's funeral. Being there was like very like beautiful, and I shed a tear, but I just like couldn't really like connect with that feeling. And then when we put the cat down, it was obviously sad and you were upset. And so when you were crying, I was crying. But then at some point, I just really let it rip. And I realized like it's really about my grandfather. You know what I mean? It's like the cat dying just like cracked me open. And so I think the story getting killed just cracked you open and just let out all of this grief about your job.
The next few weeks are a blur. Everything related to the killed story hurt. That pile of books in my office, the old Instagram posts, the side of my headphones and microphone. And then there were the how's the story questions from colleagues and friends, and the emails from experts and sources I'd interviewed asking when the episode was airing. I wanted to disappear from it all. And then there was Miles and Elliot. They had planned a listening party for the story. I knew they were excited. They were taking a risk in sharing this story publicly, but they told me that this was important to them. They wanted other people who were laid off to not feel so alone. They wanted to show the human side of layoffs, so that maybe, just maybe, companies might do things differently. I had to work myself up to text them. We got on the phone. I remember pacing in my living room as I kept apologizing. I thought they'd be angry, but they were mainly just quiet on the other end of the line. I talked to them recently about this moment. I gotta tell you, I was obviously not looking forward to telling you the news. You two had spent so much time with me. Like, I literally had dozens of hours of tape. You were so forthcoming and emotional. I just was really in this story and really believed in it and thought it could help a lot of people, but also felt a responsibility to you as the subjects of the story who trusted me. And then when I told you that the story got killed, I was surprised when you said that you mainly felt bad for me. I thought it was very sweet. Like you were trying to not make me feel bad. But like, what I want to know is, how did the story getting killed really make you feel? And I want you to be honest, like not worrying about my feelings. Like, were you annoyed? Were you angry? Like I'd wasted your time? Did you feel let down?
You want to go first, Elliot, or you want me to?
Yeah, I actually felt disappointed. Like, was it too raw? Was it too honest? So I was pretty disappointed that they kind of decided not to do it at the end.
I felt a little, I don't know, a little bit of that same almost self-consciousness, like, oh, are we, and I think for us also being transgender, there was even a moment of like, is it because we're trans and our stories are just too complicated or something? And you can't make everything about that, but
It's because I'm Hispanic.
is it because we're gay? I don't know. I mean, was the story too complicated because like this is overly intersectional and there's just like too many factors and you need a simpler story with a simpler couple? I don't know. It's a little bit of like a Rorschach test, where you're going, okay, so there's a blob. What do you see? In that kind of moment of rejection, I think I felt a little annoyed, but not annoyed with you at all. I wasn't angry with you even for a moment because I know that you believe in this project. You did not like fly out here to see us just to chit chat and make small talk. And it was frustrating to feel like the podcast that you were working with on the project didn't see what you saw, because I think we both saw the vision that you had for this story and what you were kind of looking for, and we both believed in that too. And so, it's always frustrating to not be understood, to not be seen,
I agree with that.
I just want to say for the record, like, the reason they killed the story has nothing to do with you all as characters. It has more to do with my own inability to, like, get it the way they wanted it. You know what I mean? Like, that's also my failure as a journalist to, like, make the story that they wanted to run. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did the story getting killed impact you in any way? Like, I was wondering about specifically for you, Elliot. Like, did it trigger any layoff feelings for you?
Maybe a little. And this isn't about winning and losing, really, but I did, in a strange way, I felt they still won.
Kind of like the larger powers that
The
be,
larger power won.
the big decision making, so I guess to
like the
make
company.
a reference, the man.
The company won. The power that they have won. And I'm just a person. I'm just one person. So I was pretty disappointed about that.
Oh, I'm really sorry, you guys. That kills me. I'm sorry. I've never talked to a source like this after a story's been killed. We usually don't ask our sources how they feel about it, or at least I haven't. And even though the conversation was painful, it was also a relief to hear them be honest about how they felt. But there was also another question I'd called to ask. I had an idea. Okay, so here's my question. What if I just finish making the story and release it on my own? Like, how would you feel about that?
You should go for it.
I agree. I think if you still, believe in this, I think you should see it through.
Okay, so I have your blessing?
Yeah, go for it.
Yes.
So you just heard a taste of Elliot and Miles' story. That's on purpose. Next episode, you'll hear the story that got greenlit and then killed. It's the story of Miles and Elliot's layoff experience. It's a modern-day horror story, a real nail-biter. You're also going to hear more research about layoffs, and we're going to keep scratching at the question, what is it about layoffs that make us lose our minds? Even though getting laid off was a roller coaster, and then having my story about layoffs get picked up and let go was another roller coaster. Both roller coasters I did not want to go on. I hate roller coasters. Even after all that, I still want to share this work. So what if the famous podcast backed out? I found a lot of comfort in talking to Miles and Elliot. And I learned a lot from the books and from the experts I talked to. And I think someone out there might get something out of it too. Might feel less alone.
I'm very proud of you for sticking to your guts and, just do it the way that you wanted to do it instead of how they wanted to do it.
All right. That was our first episode of Proxy. We did it. If you liked what you heard, rate and review us on iTunes. Apparently that stuff matters. And if you want more Proxy, you can get bonus episodes, our newsletter, and other goodies at patreon.com/proxypodcast. This month, you'll get an extended interview with Ofer Sharone, the sociologist you heard earlier. I didn't have time in this episode to talk about how unemployment stigma can show up in romantic relationships and friendships, but if you've been laid off or know someone who has, this is the bonus episode for you. It has concrete, useful tips on how to navigate stigma and how to better support someone who's been laid off. You can get that bonus episode at patreon.com/proxypodcast. This series is produced by me, Yowei Shaw, edited by John DeLore, and mixed by Kyle Pulley. I had research and reporting help from Kim Nederveen Pieterse, social media by Theo Cobb, theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder, tile art by Good Tape Studio. And I just want to say a big thank you to the Big Famous Podcast for letting me use the tape and reporting from the story that got killed. Honestly feel like you sponsored this series. Special thanks to Abby Wendell, Beth Patel, Juliana Reyes, Joanna Solotaroff, Laura Starcheski, Liana Simstrom, Lucy Shen, Mark Pagan, Mathilde Urfolino, Nicole Kligerman, Sandy Hogue, Thomas Liu, Tom Waring, and Wanyu Zhang. Tune in for the rest of the series and spread the word if you liked what you heard. This is an independent production, so I don't have a marketing budget or a network of podcasts to spam cross promos on. If you know someone who's been laid off, please send them the show. It's why I made the series. And if you know any Invisibilia listeners, let them know I'm here. Thank you so much for listening.